Good afternoon. Thank you for being here this afternoon. And today we have a special guest lecturer, and who I'm excited to introduce. Maria Dmytrieva is known as a feminist, gender expert, activist, and she will be sharing with us on the gender budgeting. As for me, it's very important, especially in November, not only for the Ukrainian parliament. And let's start and enjoy.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, it is actually already afternoon and morning, so hello everybody. And I apologize in advance because I completely forgot that I was going to present it in English. I was thinking that it was in Ukrainian, so in the morning when I was reading through the materials, I was translating them in my mind, so I am not lost in terms, so it may take me some time to translate them back, but I hope you will be forgiving with me. Also, thank you, Lyudmila, for introducing me. I'm not just a feminist, I am the feminist, the radical feminist of Ukraine, with whom ultra-right radicals frighten each other before they go to sleep. At the last Women's March, they tried to pry from my hands the flag of our community, Feminism UA. There were 6 of them, there was 1 of me, and I held my ground, so I think they will be even more frightened of me in the next marches. So, also, if you are not yet members of the Facebook community Feminism UA, I heartily invite you there. Please do join us. It is never boring there, to say the least. When we were discussing with Lyudmila what topics I should address in my presentation, she told me that you already talked about gender-based analysis and gender-based analysis plus. Am I correct? Did you talk about this, kid?
Some
did, okay. So, of those who did, can anybody tell me what you remember about gender-based analysis? Marina? So nobody remembers. Should I remind you about it? Okay. So gender-based analysis and gender-based analysis plus was developed in Canada, and the idea is that you don't have a uniform population. You have different groups with different priorities, different problems, and different barriers on the way to achieving their goals and objectives. And in Ukrainian, we have a joke that about the average temperature in the hospital being not a very reliable tool for diagnostics. Nobody's laughing, I understand. When we talk about generalized population, we lose a lot of nuance about what is going on with their lives, because a woman in her 50s who lives in a village and who has some kind of disability, she will be much more limited in her opportunities compared to a young urban professional, be this person male or female. Especially in our conditions of the reform of decentralization. Until recently, at the level of village councils, it was mostly women, because at this level there is a lot of work and not a lot of money. And this was the job that women tended to take. Now, when the decentralization reform allowed the money to stay at the local level, suddenly at those amalgamated communities, men en masse began to win elections and start to determine the local policies. And one of the things they have been consistently doing all over the country is cutting down on the non-essential things and pooling the resources in the essential things. Taking down the funding for local schools, local medical points where they don't have actual doctors, but they have nurses, and you can go there and receive some primary medical care, right? They cut down funding for buses to the cities because they drive a car, they don't need a bus. And if there is only one car in the village family, you can pretty much guess who is going to drive it. It will not be the woman. So they pull all the resources, I didn't write this for, they pull the resources into the infrastructure, but they don't realize that if you don't have your population's needs covered, there will be no use for the infrastructure. If there are no schools to take your children to, people with children will move away to a different place where there is a school. So you will lose the population that you want to keep by building good infrastructure. So in case of gender-based analysis, you start with identifying what groups of population you have at a certain populated location. The most basic division would be males and females. And the next division would be by age. It would be children, it would be adults, it would be elderly people. Then it would be division by being able-bodied. So you have people with, who are able to work and move around, and you have people with disabilities. Disabilities can be both physical and mental. In our parts, mental disabilities are pretty much overlooked. We have very few services for people with mental disabilities, and we have even less services for people who care for people with mental disabilities. So all these different groups of population will have different needs, different priorities, and all these priorities have to be addressed if you want to have your population happy, content, and self-actualizing. Why it is important? Because every person pays taxes. Every single person. We pay taxes, and for these taxes we are entitled to see our needs acknowledged, recognized, and addressed. So, gender-based analysis is a pretty basic tool that works with two major groups, as I said, males and females. And gender-based analysis plus includes also all these other divisions by age, by ability, by being able-bodied, maybe different religions. Like when I was studying in the US, pretty much every time I went to the bathroom, it was a very uncomfortable experience for me because there were Muslim girls praying on the floor in the bathroom. It was 6 years after the attack on New York World Trade Center, and Muslim people in the US were still pretty much afraid to practice their religion in public. Men a little less so, women more so. But as an atheist, I don't want to see your religious practice. I don't go to your churches, you don't go to the bathroom where I'm going to. But I understand they are afraid, they want to practice their religion, but if they cannot do it in any other place that is safe for them, and they're using the bathroom for everybody, well, okay, I will have to, wait till they are out or something. So, a very nice example of application of such analysis was conducted in Sweden several years ago. They had very heavy snowfalls in winter, and traditionally how they cleaned the streets was to send the snow cleaning machines through the major roads to clean them so that people who drive cars can drive to their work. Because what is important is work, right? But it turned out that when you first clean the major roads, but don't clean the roads between the buildings where people who take their kids to kindergarten are going, it is much more inconvenient for everybody. So what they did, they conducted analysis, and they saw that people who take their children to kindergarten also need to get to their work on time. So, without spending additional money, they rerouted the snow cleaning machines to go first through the residential areas to clean the roads by which people took their children to kindergartens, elderly people went to daycare centers, and after that, they were able, so the snow cleaning machine goes through the residential area, and after that they clean the public roads and the roads for individual cars. This allowed everybody to get to their work on time, not just people who use cars. People who use buses, people who use trams, they were also able to get to their work on time because they only rerouted the small cleaning machines. So we were planning to talk a little bit about gender-responsive budgeting. So basically, gender-responsive budgeting is the same principle that you acknowledge that you have different groups, and these groups all pay taxes, and all of their needs have to be reflected in the budget. And gender-responsive budgeting has been introduced in Ukraine about 5 years ago, but the first attempts to promote it were made more than a decade ago. And it was mostly by NGOs, and these NGOs partnered with the Swedish Embassy and with the Ministry of Finance to make the gender-responsive budgeting a part of the regular budgeting process at all levels. They developed the guidelines, they conducted trainings, they taught the officials at all levels how to do this. So what gender budgeting encompasses? It is a much more responsive tool which provides for learning the needs of the population. When you know what they need, you are able to address it properly. Because until recently, the entire system of budgeting in Ukraine was pretty much state-oriented and state-governed. So the state was supposed to know what is going on and what has to be done, and the population was supposed to politely follow what the state has charted for them. Gender-responsive budgeting goes all the way from the ground level to the top. So we work with the groups of population. We conduct needs assessment. We see what they need, what they want, and what part of public resources can be allocated to meet those needs. And then it is reflected in the budgeting. When we have separate budget lines for all these different activities, it enables us to see how it is being implemented. So it gives us the tool for monitoring and assessment. So, for example, I've seen the materials of the pilot project with the Ministry of Youth and Sports. They basically analyzed how many different, it was some rayon in Pro, I think. They looked at what sports clubs are available and how many girls and boys go to these clubs and what the demand for different sports activities are in this area. And they found that there were way more football clubs available than there were ballet classes available, and the demand for ballet classes was also high, but it was not met. So it looked like the money that was paid in taxes by parents of both boys and girls went into funding for football clubs, which didn't let girls in. So the money is for everybody, but only boys get to play. This is wrong, this is not the way it should be done. So they analyzed the needs and they encouraged local sports associations and local, what's the word, extracurricular, like the centers that provide extracurricular activities for school children. Like for those who are older, like Palats Pioneru, right? So they were encouraged to offer a wide selection of activities for both boys and girls, and they were told that if they run a football club, it has to be open for both boys and girls. If they don't allow girls to participate, they would lose governmental funding. So it was a very nice tool for bringing justice to leisure time of boys and girls, and this was included into their guidelines so that in other regions and other spheres they would know that taxes of taxpayers have to be spent fairly. So another thing that I wanted to talk is the materials of this project are all available online. So if you're interested, you just Google gender responsive budgeting in Ukraine and you can see their website, their materials, their presentations and their guidelines. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about regarding budgeting and gender is the method that was developed in Sweden. It was called the 3R method. It is used at the, it can be used at the very ground level from grassroots. So it looks at the representation. Then resources, then realia, for instance, I used to conduct this exercise when I was conducting trainings for journalists on gender sensitivity. They were analyzing daily newspapers, but now it is pretty much impossible to find a printed newspaper in the press booths. They don't sell them anymore. Pretty much all major daily newspapers moved online. But I would like you to imagine a newspaper that you hold in your hands. It is a hypothetical daily national newspaper, and representation in this case would be two-sided. First, we have the population of 54% women and 36% of men, right? So this is our audience, the readership of this newspaper, right? On the other hand, we have people who create this newspaper. The editor-in-chief. As a matter of fact, a lot of Ukrainian newspapers and a lot of Ukrainian TV channels have women as editors-in-chief, which is pretty unusual because all over the world it's mostly men who run things. So editor-in-chief, right? Then we have the editorial board. They are, according to the Ukrainian law, they have to be all listed in the somewhere on the last page, including with the number of copies of this newspaper or magazine for that matter. Editor-in-chief, editorial board, journalists, and photo correspondents or cartoonists, whoever is doing the illustrations. So if you look at this, if you count how many women and how many men, if they are listed at all, because in the recent years, more and more newspapers don't list the name of the journalist who prepared the material, which makes it both illegal and difficult to analyze. But if you have their names, you can see that at the national level, it would be like maybe 50-50. And the smaller the newspaper, the more women work at it compared to men. At local level, it would be 80% women, 20% men. But editor-in-chief at the local level pretty much always is a man. So we have the population in which women constitute the majority. We have the people who create this newspaper or medium outlet, of whom women constitute from 1/2 to about 80%. And then, in the case of newspapers, it would be the materials that they produce. How many heroes and heroines, how many experts, women.
Потеряла ваш студент. Это вот тут вот, да.
So, we analyze the material that we have, both the textual component and the visual component. Okay? And in this case, I can pretty much reliably say that the Institute of Mass Information, they are an NGO working with journalists and working on journalist rights. They conducted monitoring of several national level newspapers, national level news websites, and they found that about for every 4 heroes or protagonists of a newspaper article, there would be only 1 woman. You see? You see the stark difference between the actual reality of the Ukrainian population and the way they are presented in the newspaper. With experts, the situation is even worse. For every 5 men experts, there would be 1 woman expert. On TV, the situation is even worse. They don't like to invite women as experts to talk about issues that are not considered womanly. So we have protagonists who are predominantly male, we have experts who are predominantly male. In the visual part, if you analyze it, you may find that men would be more often shown with their faces on the photos in the materials. Women would be more often shown as a full figure with not discernible face. So men are presented as humans, women are presented as objects. If you look at the sports section, you will see men are presented as actors, as doers, people in action. Women are pretty much always shown with their trophies in their hands, posed in some sexy way to show off their curves, as if they are not sports people in their own right. And this is consistently observed both in Ukrainian and Western European press in the last 30 years since feminists started to study the subject. So also when we talk about people as protagonists of newspaper materials, if you analyze it, you will see that women are most often shown in traditional womanly positions like victims of crime, or elderly grandmas who lost their homes, or some absent-minded models or stars or singers who found themselves again in some unpleasant predicament or sexual scandal or something. So women are rarely, if ever, presented as actors, as politicians, as businesswomen, as scientists, as scholars. So they do make it to the newspapers, but rarely compared to all the other variants of their roles. Also, when women are talked about in newspaper material, and when I'm saying newspaper, you can pretty much reliably extrapolate that the same goes for the websites and for TV. This is observed on TV as well. So women are presented way more sexualized compared to men. Their appearance is discussed more often than men's. And for men, it has to be something absolutely extreme that people would start discussing how they look or their weight, like this MP Zvegitsky, who has been in our parliament for like 4 terms, who is huge. He takes up 3 seats in the parliament, and even he is rarely criticized for the way he looks. But if you read the materials about female MPs, not every material, but a lot of materials would mention how they look, how they have extra weight, how they should have taken better care of themselves. So the society in the person of journalists is presented with the idea that it is more important how the woman looks than what she does. If you remember how Ulyana Suprun was criticized for the way that she looks, how unkempt she is, how she never bothers to put any makeup. Is she a woman at all, some journalists ask, as if makeup is a salient characteristic of being a female. Okay, so with this we see that resources are distributed unevenly. And we are presented with a distorted picture of reality in which men are the doers and women are the objects. So when we go to realia in this situation, it will turn into the situation in which people get this distorted idea of the world and they don't consider women experts and they don't consider women's point of view on all the events because the man's point of view is presented as the default. And women are presented as the deviation from this default. So if we go to other examples of this, also a very good exercise would be to use, what's the word? Oh, okay, if I remember his name, I will tell you about him. So in Austria, they applied this model at the level of the city council because women were parking their cars not in the parking lots, but near their houses. And the city has these nice new huge parking lots, and they were really distressed that women were not using them and causing problems to other people living in those apartment buildings. And they conducted a study with both women and men to find out why women didn't use those parking lots. And women explained there are no lights on the, I mean several storied parking lots. We don't have them here that much, but in Austria they are very popular. So they don't have lights, so when you get out of the car, until you get to the stairs, there is a whole space that is dark. So you can park there in the morning, but when you go and pick your car in the evening, you cannot do it because you are afraid because you will be attacked, right? And we know who attacks women. Not aliens, not wild cats, it's men. So men constitute a threat and a danger to women, and we have to be aware of that. So the city council thought that it is not a very good situation and something has to be done. So representation was mostly men who were using the parking lots. The resources were available, but women were not using them. And this caused problems to both women and people who lived in the buildings under which women parked their cars. So to make the parking lots more hospitable to women, it was decided that they need more light, and it has to be switched by photosensors. So as soon as a person starts moving, the lights go on, and it is all lit, and everybody sees everybody. Also, they added lighting to the staircases and replaced the outer walls with windows, so there is more light there. They added light paths on the floor, so it is easy to find your way into the parking space and out of it. And through this, they increased the use of parking lots by women from 10% to something like 45%, so like 4 times, only by adding additional lights. A similar situation happened in the Czech Republic, if I'm not mistaken. They also, this method of 3 Rs is widely recommended in the European Union. So what they did, they had a park in which a lot of people from neighboring buildings were bringing their children to. So the representation was pretty much 50-50. Parents, mothers, fathers, children, grandmothers, grandfathers. The resources available were only the football field. So small children didn't have anywhere to play, girls who didn't play football didn't have anywhere to play, and only boys were able to play. But this playing field was built with everybody's taxes. So to remedy the situation, the local authorities went to all those people in the park and started asking them, what do your children need? what infrastructure you need in this park for it to be hospitable to you and that your children can spend some quality time here. And they found out that this park needed a space for small children with no division by sex, because small children, as you know, they love playing in the sand, and it doesn't matter what kind of genitalia they have, they all love sand. So they needed a sand basin, they needed some infrastructure for small children, and they needed infrastructure for older children, but not only those who wanted to play football. So in the next budgeting cycle, they allocated some money to build the playing ground for small children. They built a basketball field, and they built those constructions on which you can climb. And this became the place where girls, teenage girls, loved to come to and spend their time. So the park, with pretty much the same resources, was able to accommodate both parents of small children, and teenagers, both boys and girls, and not only those boys who love to play football. So in the recent years, they started to add the fourth R, realization. Which provides for inclusion of women at all stages of planning, implementation, and monitoring. Because when men are left to their own devices, even when they try to tend to women's needs, they end up not being very sensitive about it. For instance, have you been to Maidan recently? Who of you has been to Maidan recently? You know how the underground passage looks, like those marble stairs, which are nice and shiny, but when it is raining, it's a death trap. And the slope for prams, like, what's the word
Prams or strollers.
Yeah, stroller, thank you. So in Ukrainian it's pandus, yeah? The slopes on which you are supposed to go with your stroller is so steep and so slippery that you cannot go there. Last year there was a huge uproar on Facebook. A woman was caught on video taking her stroller and a baby across Shevchenko over that very underground passage. And a lot of people on Facebook were outraged. This stupid, she dares to put her baby in danger. She should have taken the underpassage. But as a mom myself, I've been there, and I've been there with a stroller. And if you try to go with a stroller on that slope, you have much better chances of getting killed than on the road. Because on the road, the drivers may see you and they may stop. The slippery slope doesn't care. And pretty much all the slopes that were built during the Soviet times are way too steep to be used with a stroller or by people using the wheelchairs. They are pretty much unusable, and people in wheelchairs are left at the mercy of people around them. If those people are willing to carry the person in the wheelchair down the passage, it's okay. If they don't, the person has to use their wheelchair and go across the street over the underground passage. And the city I live in, the town I live in, Vishneva, it's just on the outskirts of Kyiv, it sits on the railroad that goes to the west. It means 12 rail tracks. So if you have to get to the northern part of the town where the children outpatient clinic is, you have to either take a long way and go by the ground passage, or you have to go to the railway station, which has the overhead passage. And on that overhead passage, it has 4 stairs, 2 on this side, 2 on that side. And the slope to pull your stroller up is only on one of those slopes. So out of 4 slopes, only one has this, on 4 stairs, only one has the slope with the stroller. And let me tell you, it is unusable. And after I gave birth, I had a cesarean and I had to go a 3-kilometer around to get to the northern part to see the doctor, because I wasn't able to pick up the stroller. So this is a situation that is pretty common when men are supposed to design things that accommodate women's needs, because we know it is mostly women who go around with strollers, but they end up doing this the way it is not usable. If you take a look at those slopes over the city, you will see that 99% of those slopes are not usable, both for people in wheelchairs and for people pushing the strollers. Also, we have a very wide spread practice that stores forbid entrance with the stroller. So you either take your baby on you to the supermarket and you have only one hand to carry the basket and to put things in it, or you leave your baby outside and just hope that nobody picks it while you're gone. Because if you try to get inside the store with a stroller, you will be shouted at both by the security and by the cashiers, because they don't like people with strollers. And we know that in our country, in 99% of cases, it will be women. So this is discrimination, pure and simple, but we still aren't able to get this discrimination addressed, because the store owners say that people with strollers cause a lot of damage. So this 3R method is applicable at pretty any level where you have resources and you have people of different groups. So it is also available online if you are interested. You just Google 3R gender and you will find the website of the European Union dedicated specifically to this method, and with a lot of different examples on how it can be used. I pretty much am finished with what I was supposed to tell you. What time is it now? Do we have more time?
Yes. 15 minutes.
So I was speaking for only half an hour, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I was quick today, right? We still have like maybe half an hour? Okay, maybe I will talk to you about feminism then. This is a topic I love to talk about, and the problem will be to stop me. So, one of the most important things when we are talking about this entire situation of resource division, of allocation of resources, of needs assessment, is that we live in the social regime of patriarchy. You know that, right? And patriarchy is the system in which men control political, economic, and military resources, and through solidarity between each other in controlling those resources, they demand and expect of women reproductive, social, emotional, and household assistance and taking care of them. And this is the system in which women are supposed to do the unpaid reproductive work of taking care of children, of taking care of the elderly, of taking care of those who are not able to take care of themselves, and they are supposed to do this for free out of love. This is pretty much the reason why people who work in healthcare in Ukraine are paid so little as compared to other countries. And people working at doing other jobs like cashiers in the bank tellers, they have much higher salaries compared to teachers in kindergartens. But if you are entrusted with taking care of 30 children of other people, to my mind, it is a much bigger responsibility than taking care of other people's money, because money can be lost, it can be found, it can be returned to you by the insurance company. But if something happens to your child, nobody is going to give you another child because something happened to this one, right? Also, you wouldn't want anybody to replace your child with somebody else's, right? And women who take care of the elderly in the no, not the community centers, будинки престарілих, centers where elderly people are sent to live by their relatives when they don't have any more strength to take care of them, right? There are pretty much no men working in those institutions, but for the directors. Those they do. Every other job in those institutions, pretty rarely. And they have to carry around to help from the wheelchair to the bed to people, including obese people. Nurses working in the cancer departments, including children's cancer departments, they are paid very little, but their jobs are extremely dangerous and very frustrating and draining, and still, because this is the job that they're supposed to be doing out of love, they're paid very little. And if we look at the wider society, the only actual resource that every person has is time. And capitalism and patriarchy frame different people as worthy of different opportunities. Men are framed as fully human who are entitled to be heard, to be seen, and to self-actualize. Women are framed as a resource for men to consume and to exploit. And this is why we as women are supposed to look nice, to be presentable, because femininity as a phenomenon is all about how convenient you are to consume. This is the essence of femininity. Anybody who says you're any different is either naive or lying. So, capitalism deems rich people as worthy of being taken care of. And for that, they need special people who are not as worthy, who have to spend their time caring for other people's needs. So when we want to achieve equality, we are striving for the society in which every human being, every person, no matter rich or poor they are, be they man or woman, their life is worthy of living and their needs are worthy to be taken care of, either by them or by people who care for them, but it has to be reciprocal. Nobody has the right to demand others to care for their needs unless they have a disability and we take care of them because we are humans and this is the thing that we do. We care for other humans. One of the things that is on my mind recently a lot is the attempts to legalize prostitution. If you have heard, our president said as much in his interview that he supports legalization of prostitution. Let's put aside the basic notion that prostitution is a violation of human rights of women. Let's put aside the understanding that the very idea of legalization of prostitution goes against international commitments of Ukraine in the area of gender equality, combating trafficking in humans and exploitation of prostitution of other persons. It goes against the article of the Constitution that says that women and men in Ukraine have equal rights, because you cannot have equal rights in the country where one person can be bought for the needs of the other person. No one has the right to sex. No one, no matter what they tell you. There are needs, like to breathe, like to sleep, like to eat, like to drink, because if you don't do this, you die. Right? Nobody has died because they didn't have sex. Not a single person. And in our parts, it is often presented as both the way for Ukraine to make a lot of money in taxes by selling our young women and girls and boys into prostitution, turning effectively the state into another pimp, or because it is framed as an issue of choice. As a person has such low sensitivity, they are comfortable with being penetrated by strangers night and day into different orifices, no matter what damage they sustain in that. So our president says that he supports legalization of prostitution. The mayor of Kyiv said that he supports legalization of prostitution. Our current head of the national police supports legalization of prostitution. Moreover, the Ministry of Healthcare has a working group under it, which is run by a group of sex workers, which says that they are working to get the Ministry of Healthcare to help legalize prostitution. So in our case, when we're talking about gender budgeting, it is, if we look at this from the financial point of view, what they did in France, they researched how much money is made by the sex industry and who is paying for the expenses. So it turned out that in prostitution, women in prostitution themselves were not able to make much money because they were put in debt bondage. They were very often developing addictions either to drugs or to alcohol to be able to cope with their day-to-day experiences. But pimps were making a lot of money, but this money usually went into drug trafficking, human trafficking, illegal arms trafficking. So it basically is funneled into organized crime. But what the society, the taxpayers pay, they pay for the work of police who are called to the places where these women are kept. They pay for health care for women being repeatedly violated. They pay for health and psychological care for their children who are traumatized by the experience. And they have to pay for medical services for women who are raped by men, who learn that this is the way to treat a woman in prostitution. So in the countries where prostitution is legalized, men get accustomed to the idea of getting what they want, and the level of violence against women outside of prostitution rises as well. And this is another part where taxpayers have to come and spend their money on. So it turns out that the overall expenditures of the society to deal with the consequence of prostitution overweighed everything that that pimps and traffickers make. So for the society, it is way more feasible to criminalize the demand, as it was said as long as early as 100 years ago. As a matter of fact, feminism has been fighting for women to be able not to sell themselves, to be able to feed them since its beginning. Okay. Is something going on that I'm not aware of? Okay. So one of the things that early feminists did in the middle of the 19th century, they were saying that prostitution is a form of violence against women, and women have to be able to make their living without selling themselves. And one of the first documents of the international level addressing the so-called white slavery, that is selling of women into prostitution, was adopted as early as in 1898. The Conventions Against White Slavery were one of the first documents adopted by the League of Nations. The UN adopted the Convention on Combating of Trafficking in Human Beings in 1949. Ukraine is one of the signatories to this convention. So our country is an abolitionist country for the last 70 years. And in these conditions, to talk about the harms of prostitution puts me, I've been talking about this for the last maybe 15 years. I've been talking about the harms of prostitution and how it has to be addressed, including by the state and by the police. And for a lot of people, that makes me a prude and hater of men and hater of sex workers. But when I'm talking about the dangers for the entire society, for women, for girls, including in prostitution, and it's outside of it, I believe that we have to address all aspects, and we should listen also to the survivors of prostitution, which pretty much unanimously say that legalization is not the way to do it, and the Nordic model is. Because the Nordic model admits that prostitution is violence against women, and it undermines gender equality and all the work that we as feminists have been doing to promote women's rights in the society. So, following the research, the best way to deal with prostitution is to criminalize the demand. So the clients have to be punished for their desire to buy people for sex. So when we do that, the entire attitude changes, as it was done in Sweden in 1999. What happened there? Women's organizations have been working with women in prostitution and asking them, what can we do to make your life easier? Women in prostitution say, we don't have any levers to influence the buyers. If buyers are criminalized, we can call the police if they try to beat us or choke us or take away our money. And this is what feminist government in Sweden did. They adopted this law in 1991. At the moment when it was adopted, less than a quarter of the population of Sweden supported it. In less than 10 years, the attitude changed. Now, in 10 years, more than 75% of the population of Sweden supported this law. And now for young Swedes, it is impossible to even imagine how you can pay a person to tolerate while you have sex with them. And this attitude is spreading all over the world. This model was already adopted in Northern Ireland, in Ireland, in Canada, in France in 2016. Last year it was adopted in Israel. It is now being considered by Britain, by Germany, which legalized prostitution. Last month they officially recognized that legalization of prostitution was a mistake, and the Nordic model is the way to go. So Greece is considering this. Spain is already on their way to adopt the Nordic model. And for Ukraine at this stage, to adopt legalization of prostitution would pretty much turn our country into a hunting ground for clients, for pimps from Europe, where demand is already criminalized. And in our conditions, it would make us not only more vulnerable to international organized crimes who do trafficking in humans, in drugs, and in arms. It will make us a place where they would bring vulnerable women from other conflict areas in Northern Africa, in South Asia. And it will be us, the taxpayers, that will be responsible for helping these women to return home. And it will be us, the taxpayers, that will have to pay for the crimes that men commit, both against women in prostitution and against women outside of prostitution. I see that you are not very excited about the subject, but I am. Sorry about abusing your ears and driving a third of the listeners outside of the room. So maybe you have any questions to me about the three methods that we discussed in the beginning, the gender-based analysis plus, gender-responsive budgeting, and the 3R method, or maybe about prostitution and the Nordic model, or whatever you feel like asking a living and breathing radical feminist.
The only question was, will other researchers include non-binary persons?
On what?
About their representation of non-binary persons. Because
as a radical feminist, I have a lot of questions about the entire non-binary idea, because humans are a species that procreates by sex. So we have two sexes, not more. So when you say that the person is non-binary, what does it make this person? The identity doesn't matter as such. Our lived biological reality matters the most. Because as a woman, I cannot identify out of my oppression. Women in South Asia cannot identify out of being killed when they are pregnant with girls. Girls born cannot identify out of being killed because they are girls. So, as a feminist, I fight for dismantling of the entire gender system because it is a tool of patriarchal oppression. And non-binary people, when they are, I don't have a problem with them as long as they don't start shouting Q terms. The issue is that their needs will not be different from the people who are binary when we are talking about biological situation. Also, the share of people who identify as non-binary is minuscule. So they will not be able to, whatever the opinion is, it will pretty much fall into the wider group to which they belong. So if we are talking about hate crimes, it would be feasible to include non-binary people into the categories that you are addressing, asking about the needs, or asking about what measures they want their community to take so that they feel safe. But as pretty much with everything else, as soon as the mechanisms that protect women's rights start working, everybody else benefits, including gay people, lesbians, non-binary people, and men themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Well, what would you like to see more international cooperation when it comes to prostitution? Are there countries where the Nordic model would definitely be a bad idea to implement? Are there?
Well, I cannot think of any country for which the Nordic model would be a bad model because it is not about the funding, it is about the mindset. When the state says you cannot rape people, even if they consent, it changes the perception. Like it happened in Sweden, that when a man is caught with a prostituted woman, and it becomes known to his family and his friends, and at his work, he may lose the job, his wife might divorce him, and his friends stop talking to him. If we have something like this in Ukraine, I think it will pretty much curb the issue is the demand for prostitution is always much higher than the offer. No, demand and, what's the word? Proposition. Supply, yeah. So, to provide the necessary supply, pimps force women into obedience and sell them. They get them hooked up on drugs. And when men stop paying for this, there is no incentive for pimps to sell more women and more girls into prostitution. Because the legalized model takes down all the limitations on pimping, on brothel keeping, and on trafficking, but it doesn't take away any of the stigma that women themselves in prostitution have. It takes down the stigma for the buyers and for the sellers, but not for the women. So, but when we adopt the Nordic model, it removes the stigma from women. They are able to come for social services, they get support from the police, and they, as a matter of fact, in Sweden, women in prostitution have the highest prices for their services compared to the rest of Europe. So, it might not be ideal. There are no ideal answers here. But the Nordic model goes along with the idea of human rights, and specifically of human rights of women and of children, and it allows the society to acknowledge this. So it may be, well, there are people who claim that they are sex workers, who say that in our conditions, the Nordic model would bring police to exploit women in prostitution even more, to make them turn their clients in. The problem is that the legalized prostitution will not remove any of the violence, but the Nordic model will. So, the experiences of other countries, the research conducted there, shows that if the state shows the political will to go through with it, it works. But if the state doesn't go through with it, well, no model is working then, so.
But what about, sorry, but what about, I guess one of the strong arguments for legalization would be that you could also provide safer places for women to do this work and not get into people's cars and dangerous situations in that sense. I agree there is no ideal solution, but I guess that would be one of the
yeah, it is often mentioned, but it only works so in theory. In practice, legal brothels in Germany are populated by 4% of German women and 96% of women from Eastern Europe and Northern Africa who don't speak German, who are exploited, who are shipped all over the country to provide men with fresh meat. And the police cannot get inside to help those who are trafficked. And we are not even mentioning the illegal brothels, the animal brothels, the brothels with children, which are obviously illegal, but they do operate, because if a man can freely break the taboo of raping a woman, at a certain point, looking for more thrill, he wants to get more. Like pregnant women, women who are mentally incapacitated, women with disabilities, children. German. It is German. This is what is going on.
Yes, but is that...
It's illegal.
I understand that. I think there's strong arguments, but is that part based on research?
Yes.
Wanting more and more?
Yes, it is. Why Thailand is more popular among German tourists? Because children's prostitution is there overlooked. And the person in charge of like the High Commissioner for Animals Rights in Germany made a huge scandal because she learned about animal brothels, but she was kind of okay with female brothels. So I'm kind of, very, very suspicious of the Germans supporting their model. Also, they already acknowledged that it was a mistake, and in the Netherlands, they never provide pillows in the brothels because clients keep suffocating women. So legalization doesn't make it safe, because you cannot make safe raping of humans. No questions? Did I bore you to death? Okay, so,
Okay, so the Nordic model that we're talking about is like criminalizing prostitution more, that it is illegal now? Something like that?
The Nordic model provides three major directions. One direction, you decriminalize women in prostitution, and you cancel their previous criminal record for prostitution, so they can get jobs, right? Also, it provides for social services for them in rehabilitation, both physical and psychological, so they can get treatment they need. The second direction is criminalization of clients. On the first offense, they are offered a choice of a fine or imprisonment, and this money funds the rehabilitation services. And the third direction is training for police. Because if police believe that women in prostitution are criminals, you cannot move anything there. You have to change their attitude. After they've changed their attitude, they become supportive of women, they protect them, and they don't exploit them like in other countries. So it provides for human rights of women in prostitution, but it tells specifically it is not okay to rape people even if you pay them. There was something else I remember the guy that, when we were talking about analyzing the articles in the newspapers, there is this sociologist, Allport. For the life of me, I can't remember his name, but his surname is Allport. There is an article on him in Ukrainian Wikipedia, Allport. He analyzed genocides. And one of his, the scale, the Allport scale looks at how people are dehumanized, which creates the conditions for them to be massively exterminated. So no genocide starts from nothing, out of the thin air. First, you have to believe that these people are not human enough and they deserve it. So his this scale starts with hate speech and dehumanizing humor. The jokes about stupid broads or unpleasant gays or stingy Jews or something like that. Then it is isolation, that you don't accept people from these groups into your near circle, you don't see them as possible friends. Then it is destruction of property, then it is violence, and then it is mass-scale violence and genocide. And as a homework for the journalists that I was working with, I gave them this upward scale and I asked them to see how this scale relates to women in Ukraine. Not only in Ukraine, pretty much everywhere. And you will see that we are one step closer to genocide. It falls neatly into this scale because misogyny allows us to continue to exploit and to hate. Why it is important? Pretty much because humans, as other apes, are wired for justice. There is this video, if you've seen it, this is the last tale I'm telling you today, so don't be so bored. So there is a video on YouTube about a monkey who was taught to give to the experimenter a piece of rock for exchange of a cucumber. And when this monkey saw that another monkey was given not a cucumber, but a grape for the stone, this monkey went ballistic. He started throwing rocks and poop at the experimenter, and the experimenter was unable to get this monkey to cooperate until the monkey also got a piece of a grape. So this video is available online, and it pretty much supports the idea that we are hardwired for justice. This is supported by the research conducted in the States. If in the company where you work, people are allocated work justly, and everybody knows how much money everybody makes based on their experience, their involvement, their knowledge, everybody works better. Because everybody knows how this works, and everybody sees that this is a just system. So for us, as a society, to see this dehumanization of women, turning of women into a resource for men to consume, it has to be justified by something. And this justification is misogyny, or perception of women as subhuman. Sexism is a form of this misogyny. And to be able to address the injustices of our society, we have to address the mother of them, the misogyny. I think that this is where I wrong. And thank you for not leaving in the middle of my speech. And also, I wanted to remind you that you are heartily invited to Feminism Meeting.